Welcome. Hey, Jeremy Johnson, JJ.
Now, for all you've done to your bodies, it's still real to me, damn it.
Amen, brother.
Welcome
Love
to a
it.
special edition of It's Still Real to Me, damn it. We got a special guest with us tonight. Jerry down in the right-hand corner. We'll let him come up first. He's an old friend of mine. Has a great media channel podcast of his own called Chronic Conversations.
Yes, sir.
Jerry, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've wrestled about 25 years. I'm pretty much retired now. I do have a podcast called Chronic Conversations that I host. We also have a YouTube channel called The Chronic Network where we host the Chronic Chronicles, which are comedy sketches, shorts. And then we are also working on producing horror shorts. And eventually we'll be coming out with Grained Out Production where we'll be doing all kinds of different productions.
You know, you're making the rest of us look bad. You know that, right? All right. From his second home in a hotel room, we think somewhere in Louisiana, in the Mid-South Territory, Jeremy JJ Johnson. Welcome aboard, buddy.
Hey, I was in Louisiana this morning. I'm in Montgomery, Alabama this evening. So I'm moving around, buddy.
The voice of the Fife Red Devils, one of the voices of the Fife Red Devils.
Yeah, I just tag along.
You're not really the star.
No, obviously not.
To the star of the Sylvania Rams. I'm wearing the hat today. And if you didn't see my message to Coach Van, I admitted I was old and forgot to schedule a show this week. Howie James.
Hey, guys. How's it going tonight?
Howie, you are the host of It's Still Real to Me, and that's about all you do, right?
That's all I do.
And the coach of Tyler Van's story. So, all right, guys, let's get into this. I'm so excited about this tonight. Bring myself out, and I'm getting all kinds of pop-ups all of a sudden. But let's start with one thing. I brought Jerry on. He has some experience with Terry, but Jerry also worked a bunch of years out there as a working wrestler. When we start talking about Terry Gordy, we have to talk about he dropped out his freshman year of high school, and I've sent you guys some pictures, which I'm planning on putting on Facebook under RiverCity-Media. There's a collection I have of pictures of Terry Gordy from 13, 14, 15 years old as a pro wrestler, including wrestling Ernie the Cat Ladd at 15 years old in Mississippi in IWA. But, Jerry, the question I had for you, what would it be like to be 13, 14 years years of age on the road learning the business?
Well, nowadays it's a little different, but let's go back in time. I came in right at the end of when backstage at wrestling shows was kind of the wild, wild west. And that was the tail end. So that means he was fresh in the middle of it.
Right.
I can't even imagine being that age and having to deal with the atmosphere and culture because it's a completely different culture than you're used to outside of the dressing room. And to come in and only be socialized by junior high so far, I can't imagine what it was like. But he grew up in it. I mean, his whole family, from his cousin Jamie Kyle, R.I.P. Jamie Kyle, that he trained with at 13, 14 years old, all the way up to Captain Hook. So he wasn't going in totally green either. So I'm sure that really helped as far as being backstage and dealing with that culture. And some of that culture is probably, unfortunately, what led to some of his problems later on. It's a very tough business for a grown man, let alone a 14 or 15-year-old kid.
One thing I heard Dutch Mantell say in a shoot interview today was Dutch was talking about Terry at 15, 16 years old. He was already an in-ring performer with like a veteran. I mean, he wrestling instantly. Have you ever heard of anybody taking to wrestling that fast?
In his case, I think it has a lot to do with family, only in the situation where they're second or third generation wrestlers. My son grew up and probably knew how to bump as soon as he knew how to stand, even though I tried to persuade him against that. He wanted to do like Daddy was doing. So you start pretty young in there playing around, watching around. So by the time you're actually able to do something, he was probably more experienced than most guys that are having their first match by that time, especially nowadays, because they're so poorly trained. They're not trained as long as they used to be. They're not trained as thoroughly as they used to be. So he had that going for him, his whole family there, and then getting trained with all parts, not just the bump and not just, but the psychology and the storytelling and everything else, which he was so great at.
Absolutely. Howie, you've got a 13, 14-year-old daughter. I've got a 13-year-old daughter. I sent you some pictures of Terry at that age. He looked like he was a 6'4", 250-pound man. But it would be hard for me to imagine my child who wouldn't even come watch the dog for an hour while I did a podcast. Living as their own in Mississippi, out of Chattanooga, wrestling Ernie Cat Ladd, Gino Brito. What was it? I mean, is it a different time, different place?
Yeah, absolutely. We coddle the kids too much now, just to be honest. But back then, like you said, Terry was at 14, probably about 6'4", 200-something pounds. He was a grown man by the time he got 15 years old, 14 years old. And that helps a lot as far as the size, having that size.
Absolutely. JJ, the one thing that you always comment on every picture I've ever sent you from my little collection of Terry Gordy photos that I've acclaimed over the last 20 years is you always comment on how young he looks. One I particularly sent you was with him and Norvell Austin and Robert Gibson, and he didn't have long hair, had really short hair. You could really see this is a young man learning life.
Yeah. But not to jump back to what you guys just talked about, but I couldn't imagine at 14, 15 years old being out on the road and doing the things that he did, because I always felt like he had a baby face even when he was, later on in years. To me, he just had that, just a baby face, even though he was a big bad dude. But I think probably part of what helped him, back to what you guys were saying earlier, is the fact that the guy could wrestle and he got it. And I probably, those grown men that he was in the locker room with, wrestling with, probably had respect for him just for simple fact that he understood what he was doing, and he did it at a high level, even though he was that young.
That's a great question. I'll throw that one to you, Jerry. What is it to earn respect in a life like that?
I don't know how much somebody, because again, one, he was 6'4", and I also had family all around him and grew up in the wrestling business. But it was a lot of ass whoopings for at least the first year. A lot of guys think they're trained when they finish with school and they get into the ring the first time, but you're not. That's when the training really begins. That's when you really start to learn your craft. And I was stilted a little bit. I had some good foundational training, but it was about 3 years later before I got with the likes of Ted Allen, Ricky Morton, a few other guys that helped kind of Big Wood. Shout out to Greg Hollander, who helped.
Yes,
David Young, Rawhead Rex as well, one of my mentors who helped shape me into what I was. So I think that is really a great advantage for him already going in, is he's going to earn respect because, like the other gentlemen were saying, he's already at a different level. He was probably at a higher level than a lot of the guys he was working back then.
Good. We're quickly going to run through some early stuff. Howie, early on, Terry, he's out in Mississippi, he's wrestling. He's really putting over other talent. He's learning the business. He comes back to Chattanooga and works for Luthez at 14, 15 years old. But he couldn't work as himself. He started under a hood so that people wouldn't rout him out that he's 15, 16 years old. What would it be like coming home and having to put on a hood and couldn't be yourself?
Now, not being able to be yourself, putting on the hood had to be difficult, but actually being at home and with more family and friends around, that had to comfort him some. I was going to ask Jerry about that as far as coming back home. Would that not make you feel better looking out in the crowd and seeing people that you know personally?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's hard to get sometimes family and friends to support you. It's always the strangers that support you the most. So to me, that was something special in and of itself is when it's these complete strangers or cheering for you, booing you for any reason, just to elicit that kind of emotion out of people is such a high that it's really hard to top it.
Jeremy, back to the same subject. He's 14, 15 years old. He's back home in Chattanooga. He's going to leave again shortly, but it had to be leaving again. It had to be he left, dropped out of high school, went and trained, come back, and left again and went to Canada was one of his first stops. Nova Scotia to feud with Dr. D, David Schultz, most famously that slapped John Stossel on the head in the WWE. You're now 16, 17 years old. You're taking off to Canada. Man, I get nervous going to Canada at 40. I'm older now.
Now, what are you referring to, Randall? Your fear of flying or just fear of Canadians?
Well, I kind of asked that question because you spend a lot of time on the road.
Yeah.
On the road.
Well, and of course I'm middle aged at this point, but it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder if he felt homesick and he had that little shot at home and he got comfortable and it's like, hey, I like it like this. Or was he so motivated to succeed and so in that he didn't think about it? I mean, I know just for my travel, I told these guys earlier, Jerry, I felt like I was a territory wrestler because I'm going hotel to hotel to and everything. Or was he so focused, which is what I try to do, is just focus on my job and what I've got to do the next day. Was he so focused on the just making it that he didn't even think about it? That would be my question. Wonder what his thought process was.
Jerry, did you know anyone who was in, because his next move from Canada was back to Mid-America. Do you know anyone that actually, we've all heard the nightmares of Nick Goulas running Mid-America. Do you know anyone that actually worked for the Goulas Welch Promotions?
I'm sure I do, but I never spoke with anybody about it. I wish I would have talked more. Today, there's more of an openness in pro wrestling in the back to inquire about things like that. Back then, you kind of stuck to yourself. It was a group family atmosphere, but on the other side, you kind of stuck to yourself because everybody was, gunning for that spot. So there was always the, hey, how you doing? And then right after.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, we're getting through this early career early. How he goes back to Mississippi. He goes to Memphis, finishes this up, wrestles David Schultz some more, goes back to Mississippi at 16 or 17 years old. He beats Bill Ash, wins the IWC Mississippi Heavyweight Championship. But at the same time, he meets a guy from Pensacola, Florida, who was wrestling as Lord Michael Hayes. And the promoter, the Great Mephisto, was their promoter, kind of puts them together. And that is the birth of what would become the Freebirds. A 19-year-old Michael Hayes and a 17-year-old Terry Gordy. I told all that to say this. They were successful. They were making a living. From what I could see, $40 a night, 6 nights a week wrestling. Terry Gordy got a $10 raise. Michael Hayes didn't. They both walk out together. What kind of friend is that to walk away from your job to say, I'm going with my friend. I don't know where I have a job?
A real one.
That's the
No
best friend you could ever have, because nobody would probably do that in today's era, just to be straightforward with you.
Jerry, you said it. They're making $40 a night in 1977. And Terry got raised to 50 and Michael stayed at 40. And they both pack up their stuff and head back home to Tennessee. That had to be hard.
Oh, yeah. I know it had to be, especially at that time, because they were so new. They weren't established yet, and they were still making a name for themselves. And I wish more guys today would know their worth. That was part of the problem when I was coming along, too, is a lot of guys didn't know their worth, and that's why they got jerked around by promoters like they did. And I just can't see Terry putting up with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I got a quick question. Do we know why he got the $10 raise and Hayes didn't?
I think it's because he was the Mississippi heavyweight champion.
Oh, okay. All right.
And they gave him a little raise for that. All right, Jeremy. Hayes and Gordy now, as a tag team, moves back to Memphis. There's a real famous story on YouTube that they show up and try to get Jerry Jarrett to play, or whoever I think it was Eddie Marlin, get him to play Freebird as they enter the ring, and everybody thinks they're crazy. They're carrying a record around.
They were.
They get, and even Terry Gordy was not behind this at the time. They convinced Mid-South Coliseum Monday night, play Freebird, spin the lights. Terry Gordy, Michael Hayes come down the aisle together as the Fabulous Freebirds. They had been people use music, but nothing like this.
I mean, can you call them innovators?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you look at what goes on now, I mean, the entrance is everything for a lot of guys. I mean, you get, geeked out over an entrance more so than you do for the actual match itself. But to think about that at that time, that was the best that was the best they had, right? So spinning those lights, playing it over the PA, which was probably one of the more wildly popular songs in that era. So I mean, I just can't believe, it's like, who thinks of these things?
Michael Hayes.
I mean, but just, who's sitting around probably having a beer or whatever they were doing? Hey, you know what? I'll get them to play Freebird and spin the lights. How about that? That's my best Michael Hayes impression. So I don't.
I give you a C-.
Well, I'll take it.
We had a question coming into this. How important was the success of that song Freebird, that everybody knew it? Because soon after, you had Junkyard Dog coming down to Another One Bites the Dust. I think any other song other than Freebird really doesn't bite it. And back then, Jerry Jarrett said in a shoot interview, back then, nobody was chasing them for royalties so they could get by with it.
Mm-hmm.
But that song was a lot of it.
Yeah, that was huge because, like Jeremy said, it kind of gets your blood pumping before the match starts. And then the way Terry and Michael would hit the ring and just start whooping up on everybody while the song was still playing sometimes, it was exciting for everybody.
Absolutely.
What story is not better with some music, whether it's a movie or a TV show or that? Yeah, that's genius.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys.
People, I didn't mean to cut you off, Randy, but people will remember that in the future when they hear that music, that first note. Everybody gets excited, knowing, hey, that's Michael and Terry come down to the ring there.
To this day, the first thing I say when a song comes on is who came out to it back in the day. That's the first thing that pops in my mind.
Hey, Jerry, one of the great things, I actually got to go see Leonard Skinner when Terry was there one night and hang out with him.
Wow.
At the UTC Arena with Terry Gordy,
Nice.
And Leonard Skinner. And one of the great stories of the night, Terry told everybody he was going to get them backstage, and they wouldn't let Terry backstage. And he was standing at the gate yelling at them that he was a Freebird, and they wouldn't let him back. So it was great. They leave Goulas again, and they head down to Bill Watts. To me, it's very critical what happens next. Bill Watts doesn't like Michael Hayes' work, so he adds a veteran from the Hollywood Blondes, Buddy Roberts, who had last wrestled for years, to be the bumper of this group. And he wanted Terry and Buddy Roberts in the ring and Michael on the mic. Tell me what Buddy Roberts meant to the Freebirds.
He was the Arn Anderson to the Freebirds. He was the, like you said, he was the anchor to me. He was he gave as much believability to the Freebirds as Terry did his own way, I believe.
and it could work and bump and everything else.
Great worker.
Howie, they come back to Georgia with Terry and Buddy and Michael, so Michael can wrestle, and Ole Anderson creates the Freebird rule, which allows any of them to defend the Georgia national tag team championship. That was the final straw to me. We're fixing to go to Texas. We're fixing to set the world on fire. We're in Georgia. We're going to split the Freebirds up, but before we do, we're going to create this rule where any 2 or 3 can be at the ring.
Yeah, it made it difficult for the opponents to try to figure out what to game plan against, because you didn't know which one you was going to get in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael Hayes began to wrestle again. Jeremy, as much as I love the Freebirds, this show's about Terry Gordy. Michael Hayes may have been the mouthpiece. Buddy Roberts may have been the bump machine. Terry Gordy was the guy that we all sat in our audience and was afraid of.
Yeah, well, we've already talked about his size. Who wouldn't be afraid of a guy 6'4", 290? But the fact is that he could go. I mean, he wasn't just a giant that moved like a giant. He was a big man who could move. I guess, would you classify him as a super heavyweight? But he definitely was a heavyweight. And, not only that, is he had a high level of skill. He's a veteran at this point, a real veteran, and really good at what he does in the ring. So, I mean, who wouldn't be intimidated?
The punch, the working punch. Jerry, we're all fans. You're a former wrestler. Mm-hmm. What makes every interview they talk about Terry Gordy? Terry Gordy was one of the best big men in the world. For me, it was some of the matches in Japan I saw with Terry and Tenaru. Mm-hmm. It was for UFC, but it looked like UFC. It looked real, and it felt real, and it were big money fights. We have kind of broke kayfabe, but still yet, when you can buy into that moment and you can make it just as real as you want to, mm-hmm. That's an ability not a lot of people have.
Yeah, and it's his ability is so polished from every facet, even the little tiny things that make the biggest difference in a match, like the facial expressions. Who had facial expressions like Terry? I mean, he could scare you with one look. You didn't know if he smelled a fart, was about to shit, or, was about to knock you out. But either way, you didn't want to be around when it happened.
Right.
Before we go to Texas, there's one big thing that happens that we got to talk about a little bit. There was a period they separated for about a year. They separated Hayes from Gordy. Buddy Roberts, I don't know where he went, but he went away. And Terry Gordy began to team with Jimmy Superfly Snuka, and they held the national heavyweight tag team championship. I just want to get all 3 of your opinions. How impressive would a Jimmy Snuka in 1982 with a Terry Gordy been, Jerry?
That would have been, one thing I like about tag teams like that is I like both. I like the ones like the Rock and Roll Express who are just like literally like one, and I love when they take 2 bigger than life guys and put them together. So it'd be interesting to see. Unfortunately, I haven't seen any of those matches, but I'd love to see how they work together and how they told their stories for sure.
Yeah, you should. I've got some bookmarked. I'll send them to you.
Yeah, please do.
Jeremy, Jimmy Snuka with Terry Gordy, feuding Mike Hayes, and a series of partners included Kelvin Sullivan before he went crazy in Florida and did his thing down there.
Went crazy. You mean he was sane at any point?
He was a battler at this point.
So I'm with Jerry on that's a kind of a unique pairing. But I like the fact that you got somebody like Terry who would be the muscle, even though Superfly had a quite impressive physique, but Terry would be the heavyweight, the muscle, and Superfly could be that quick guy. That guy could, get on the top rope and do his thing. And I like teams like that where you got one plays one role, one plays the other in the ring. One of them's the enforcer, for lack of a better term, and the other one is, the speed or the quickness. So I'll have to find some of those matches. I've not watched those. That'd be impressive.
The one thing that Georgia did, Howie, was the greatest feud, other than they finally put Michael and Terry back together. But for about a 6-month period, all around the Georgia Loop, they had, to me, one of the greatest not talked about series of matches I've ever heard of, and was lucky enough to see one as a junior in high school. Stan Hansen, Ole Anderson versus Terry Gordy and Jimmy Snuka. You imagine those 4 monsters in the ring at the same time.
Yeah, that would be nuts. Talking about Terry and Superfly, that would be like a thunder and lightning type of deal where you got Terry being the thunder and Jimmy could just come out of nowhere, out of the sky, being the lightning, And but those 4 right there in the ring, it had to be what the modern day people call a major slobber knocker of a match with probably not a whole lot of wrestling moves, just a lot of beating the crap out of each other.
A lot of meat slapping.
Yes.
A lot of what, Jerry?
I said a lot of meat slapping.
Oh,
Kind of reminds me a little, still in our past, but it kind of reminds me, because I always like the big guy, little guy. Of course, Snook isn't exactly little, but it kind of goes in with the thing. It almost reminds me of the Big Daddy Cool Shawn Michaels thing, and I've always been a fan for some reason of the big guy with the little guy. I love the smart aleck little guy heel that runs his mouth and then uses enforcer to do all the work, so it just makes you hate him even more. So I respect that from a heel level on a whole different level. It's greatness.
The modern day wrestling tag team that I think of when I think of the Terry and Jimmy would be the Street Profits right now.
Yeah.
one thing, we're going to move on to Texas now, but I've heard it described is every good hero needs a villain. Your Fritz Bond and WCW had great, or WCCW had great TV. They're in the Sportatorium, sold out. They have David, Kevin, and Kerry Von Erich at the peak of their, and everybody knows that's what's this show. I love David Von Erich. If you're Fritz Von Erich and you want to find somebody that can match up with your boys, why does the Fabulous Freebirds work so well, Howie?
I think it's because of the uniqueness of each individual wrestler that's on there. You got so many. You got three different personalities trying to make up a team, and it just gelled. They just gelled together.
Jeremy, when was the first time you became aware of the Freebirds versus the Von Erich feud?
I mean, gosh, I was probably in my 12 years old, maybe somewhere in that neighborhood. Freebirds own Texas for sure. I mean, I'm sorry, the Von Erichs own Texas for sure. And I of course access for me was limited. No dish, no cable, none of those things where I lived, and so my only hope was to get a scrap of a clip of a match, on WDEF did some Georgia Championship wrestling and things, and maybe some way, I don't even remember, but that was the only way I could even know what was going on outside of that,
Right. But it was, Jerry, one of the big things back then, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, I learned all my wrestling in the 80s through wrestling magazines. Mm-hmm. And the Birds and the Von Erichs all of a sudden was on the cover of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Inside Wrestling, everything. I have one somewhere in this house that is Terry Gordy and David Von Erich. 6'8" David Von Erich, 6'4" Terry Gordy. That's a natural great match. And Von Erich would have probably been a world champion had he not died. And Terry Gordy would have made a great feud for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the great thing about Terry is he made a great feud for anybody, because that really is the key. I mean, it is good versus evil, and you need to have, you know, your babyface. You want to get them sympathy, and what better way for Fritz to get his boys sympathy than with some guys like the Freebirds? First, you got Michael Hayes, which is, you know, at that time, other than Flair and a few other people, was bar none on the microphone. So he was gold right there. He could talk up, you know, a stadium full of people. And then, like you said, you had Buddy, who could wrestle his butt off. And then you have Terry, who was the intimidator, the enforcer. And you never knew if you were facing one of them, two of them, three of them. So it added that thing of sympathy, because it was always going to be more on their side than there was on the other side. And I love that.
Jerry, before we jump over to the other guys,
Mm-hmm.
When you're in the ring and you have worked, I guess, most of your career as a heel,
Mm-hmm.
what is your job, and what was Terry's job and Michael's job and Buddy's job to get the Von Erichs over?
I was supposed to say that is the job right there. A lot of guys are selfish, and they want to be tweeners, cool heels, want to smile at the fans after. I know there's not a lot of kayfabe anymore, but you still can help people suspend their disbelief by being as much as your character as you can. MJF, for an example.
Yes.
He's a heel 24/7. I was a heel 24/7. So the key was to be the guy that when somebody ran into your Red Food store, they told all their friends, this guy really is an asshole. So I really want to see the Von Erichs whoop him now, you know, and I'm sure that's the way they were. And it kind of probably helped make that feud what it was, one of the greatest ever.
Jeremy and Howie, let me go back to Howie first. Howie, WCCW was on ESPN, but when you were a young man, the Freebirds were on ESPN every night. I could sit at home in Dayton, Tennessee as a sophomore in high school and see Terry Gordy replays 3 or 4 times a day on ESPN when they had stuff on repeat. And the fact that this was going national and was really up against Vince, kind of national TV versus national TV. And I promise in the Southwest area, the Freebirds and the Von Erichs were holding their own against Vince. How important is having that visual on TV to the feud that would come over the next 4 or 5 years?
It had to be huge, because it's one of those things. I grew up just like Jeremy. I didn't have cable or nothing, so the only way I could keep up with wrestling was by the wrestling magazines that my cousins bought. But being on ESPN, it wasn't like Vince having his syndicated shows on terrestrial TV, because ESPN was just basically a cable / satellite network, but it was getting into people's homes, and that's what you wanted to do.
Would you say that exposure is everything?
Yeah.
I mean, for anybody today trying to make it, the more eyes that can be on you, the better your chances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's why WWE has grown so much in the last, I know it's kind of a stupid statement, but that's why they've gotten a little bit bigger over the last few years, because they've gone to Fox, which is a terrestrial type thing, because still, even to today, I know people don't have cable or satellite or internet. So they can still watch the wrestling on Friday night and kind of keep up with some of it.
Yeah.
Jerry, as this feud develops, it becomes the heyday of WCCW. And we all agreed when we started this show, it was what we all knew the best. Tell me what your memories, and then Howie and Jeremy, kind of the same thing. What were your memories of this time in the Freebirds' career, and do you remember any of the particular matches that you've been able to review over the last few years?
Oh my gosh. You know, gosh, let me think on that. That's actually, I might have to go deep into the memory vault with that. Jump on to somebody else. Let me think about that one for a minute.
Let me go ahead. I'm going to jump in.
Go ahead, sir.
And add, if you go to YouTube now, there's a ton of Von Erich versus Freebirds matches. there's a very short match that, if you have time, is Terry Gordy versus David Von Erich. And what happens is, the story they tell is Buddy Roberts comes to the ring to wrestle Mike Von Erich, and Mike's hurt or Kevin, one of them, is actually legitimately hurt, and they substitute David in. Well, the Freebirds ask for a substitute of their own, and it's only about a 4-minute clip. But watching that 4 minutes and the greatest 4 minutes, Terry Gordy has the greatest punch in the history of pro wrestling. If you watch boxing, and Jerry was a Gold Glove boxer, and we've all been in fights, power. In pro wrestling, you want to see a punch, you wind it up, you twerk it back, you throw it around. Terry Gordy's punch came somewhere from right field. And to him land those punches and David Von Erich react is absolutely and this was early in the feud. This was absolutely my favorite match of the feud, and it's so short. Think a minute 30, and the Freebirds get disqualified. Jeremy, you got anything that while Jerry?
Well, I mean, the thing, really to me that it would be how the feud kicked off. And if I'm remembering correctly, that match, and I know that match is when Terry slammed the door on Kerry Von Erich in the cage match versus Ric Flair, which I think some attribute that was the beginning of the whole feud.
Yeah.
So they had a fan vote, and he was getting his shot, and legitimately the fans voted Michael Hayes, because the Freebirds went to Texas as fans' favorites, and the fans legitimately voted Michael Hayes the referee, Terry the guarder of the door. Kerry and Michael Hayes have fallen out in the ring. Kerry goes to leave, and Terry Gordon slams his head into the door. Greatest move ever. Is that the one you're?
I mean, could it be any better than that?
No, it's.
I mean, you look who you got in the ring there. I mean, Kerry Von Erich, Ric Flair, Michael P.S. Hayes, and Terry Gordy. Pretty good up there.
Howard, you got anything?
It's a huge rivalry back then. Everybody wanted to see it. It's one of those deals to where people heard about it because you didn't have social media to actually see it, but people was getting these magazines and reading about it, that when it came to your area, it sold the place out.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Absolutely. And at this point, Jerry, I read in a little article at this point, the Freebirds negotiate one of the most interesting contracts in wrestling history, where the Freebirds, all three of them, are only in Texas every 3 weeks together. 1 week you would have Michael and Buddy there, and Terry would go home. The next week you would have Terry and Buddy there, and Michael would go home. And then the third week, which would be the big shows, or the fourth week would be the big shows, would be all of them there. The fact you can be so flexible with them at that point, that had to make it so easy to book.
Well, that, and two, guys are so overexposed nowadays that made it more special when you did see them all together. And I think that's one of the things that's lacking today is nothing seems special because you see it all the time anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Very good point. All right, guys. We can go back to Texas in a minute, but I want to jump at the end of Texas is when his All Japan career really picks up. Jeremy, we just finished our greatest tag team segment, and we hit both of us.
Yeah.
Early on, he begins to work with Stan Hansen, and then he leaves Hansen and begins to work with Dr. Death Steve Williams. Those two monster tag teams in Japan, that's what Japanese wrestling was about. And I think we both had them both at the all time.
Right. Well, they were one of the bigger teams in that era, the Miracle Violence Connection, I think is what they were named. And you got a guy like Now, let me just say this: how intimidating are those two dudes together, Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and Terry Gordy, and working that strong physical, which it's all physical. I mean, I believe that, not from experience, but Jerry he can. It's all physical, but it's a whole other level in Japan. And I'm trying to recall when we did our tag teams, how many title reigns they had in all Japan. But I think it was significant. I'm trying to remember that, but I don't have that or my notes here. But scary. I'll say that.
Howie, they in this time as we're out of Texas and he's in Japan, and he comes back to WCW and even works. Terry Gordy and Steve Dr. Death Williams as the Miracle. They're not called the Miracle Violence Connection here in the U.S. A great program against the Steiners.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, being in Japan and all that. I mean, you're looking at two guys that's 6'4", 6'5". In Japan, they're giants because they're small people over there. So they were an attraction over there just by their size and their height. And then once they got into the ring and just started whipping up on everybody, they became superstars.
Hey, so I I did a little bit of reading, and I think, and I don't have my article that I read, but that at one point they were making $10,000 to $15,000 a week in Japan, wrestling. So that makes you understand why it was appealing to go to Japan, when you're making, even now, $10,000 to $15,000 a week, working in Japan.
Jerry, what's the difference in? We talked about we're out of Texas, we're over there now. What's the difference in Japanese wrestling and American wrestling?
Well, nowadays it's kind of pretty equally mixed up. A lot of people do what they call the shoot or the strong style, and a lot of guys are just pure workers. American style is more of a work style. There was a magic behind it. There was a specialness that only a few guys were talented enough to really carry off, and then the rest of us were stiff. A lot of that came from those guys grew up in the catch can systems, just like some of the older guys like Carl Gotch or going back far like that, Billy Robinson, some of those guys. So when you're trained in a dojo there, I'm sure everybody's heard the Hulk Hogan story, got his leg broke, yada, yada, yada. Nobody made you pay dues more there because you learned to fight first, you learned to wrestle first, and then you went to the other stuff. Whereas America, especially nowadays, you get in the ring and they're teaching you how to bump, and you don't even know how to wrestle. You don't know how to throw a punch. You don't know how to fight or do those things. So it's more of a solid contact in areas that you're not going to get injured, but you're going to get hurt sometimes. To me, it's more believable in a live setting because you hear the smacks, you see the whereas on TV it doesn't matter as much because you can work more because of the camera helps you tell some stories, sort of like in a movie or something in a choreographed scene. So there's definitely more of what they call a stiffness or a little rougher edge to the any kind of shot thrown in the Japanese style versus the American style. I respect both and probably the working style more because I was never able to get that. I mean, I was told I was too stiff in lockups by like Dr. Tom Pritchard. So, those guys were so light, they could literally work you without them feeling it, but they could make you, even in the ring with them, believe what was going on. They were so good at it. So that's really the difference in the styles. Is one is more worked and one is much more shoot style and much stiffer.
All right. We're going to kind of end up, we got about 15 minutes left, 10 minutes. So I want to really quickly, we know about, he ended up in the WWE, ECW, but there was some singles accomplishments that we need to address. And we'll start with you, Jerry, and then we'll go around the horn. He was a UWF champion when Bill once tried to take UWF national. He was the Japanese Triple Crown champion in AJPW, which is the same as the World Heavyweight Championship in that association. Those were heck of accomplishment. Did you like Terry Gordy, the singles wrestler, or the tag team wrestler better?
Man, I'm a tag team guy, so I'll have to go tag teams just between some of the names you've mentioned. I mean, he's been in the Freebirds, which is probably one of the greatest things ever. And then you have him with Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and all of those sort of things. So even though I enjoyed his singles runs, for me, it's tag teams all the way.
Cool. Howie, same question to you. 3-time world champion, ECW run as a single wrestler, a short WWE run as a wrestler later in his career. But really, it's that period, UWF, All Japan, Terry Gordy, the singles wrestler. Do you prefer the tag team or the singles?
I prefer the singles because I saw him wrestle as a single back in Rainsville when I was like 10, 11 years old.
What was that like?
I'm sorry, to what?
What was that match? Who was it against? Do you remember?
I don't remember who it was, but my mom had bought us tickets, and we were sitting on the floor at the Civic Center in Rainsville, and we were sitting on the second row, I believe it was, maybe third row. Of course, it wasn't a ton of people there, but he came out and he started wrestling against whoever it was, and I don't remember. But before you knew it, which most of Terry's matches, he was out on the floor. And before we knew it, he was actually hitting the guy sitting in my chair. And my mom sat there and watched him do it, and then she jumped out over me because I ran away when he got to my chair.
That's awesome. What a great story. Jeremy, Terry Gordy versus Terry Gordy tag team.
I'm gonna have to go with the tag team. Just more. Well, I mean, obviously more decorated as a tag team wrestler, but you mentioned Jimmy Snuka, Dr. Death, Steve Williams, Michael P.S. Hayes, Stan Hansen. I'm going to go with tag team.
I think I could go with you on that. Jerry, you were lucky enough, and we got 10 minutes, guys, so we'll start wrapping up with some thoughts. You were lucky enough to be in a lot of locker rooms with Terry Gordy and Ray Gordy. Mm-hmm. Got a story for us before we go on?
I got a couple quick ones. One is the first person I ever met, Superstar, was in the back, and now it's more okay to be a mark in the back than it was then. It was frowned upon. For some strange reason, I don't know why all these guys are doing wrestling since everybody hates wrestling so damn much, but that was the thing back there to not mark out. So I'm very young in it, maybe 2 years in, and I'll walk backstage, and there's Terry there in a ponytail, tank top, jeans, but I don't recognize him at all. Like, here is, like, I'm getting chills. Freebird Terry Gordy standing right next to me, and it is just not clicking for whatever reason. I'm like, my God, he seems so familiar. Who is this big old dude back here? Like, is he coming here to work? Like, who is this guy? So whenever somebody, and they looked at me like I was crazy and go, that's Terry Gordy. And I'm like, okay, Terry Gordy's back here. It was fucking Terry Gordy. So, wow. So I had to put on this non-marked, non-excited, non-inner child face and be like, hey, how you doing? He's like, hey, I'm Terry Gordy. Every time one of the guys, the legends, my heroes said that, it just blew me away. I just want to go, yeah, no. Jerry Anderson, pleasure to meet you, sir. So it's really funny trying to play off my fandom when I first met him and seeing him like that. And this story, I don't know if I'm supposed to tell or not. This is a little bit of an insider story. So Ray was doing a show, and this is before he went to the WWE, was doing a show in Saudi Daisy and did a move off the top rope and messed up his ankle pretty bad. And this is right before he was supposed to go, I think, like to Japan and WWE, and just fixing to take off and explode. And I won't say between who, but someone with him was arguing with him about what a not smart person he was. I won't use her words about ruining his chances in a local yokel show versus you're fixing to go to WWE. So I thought that was a bit of a funny story too, just to hear him barraged like that about him wrestling at those shows. But that's a risk you take anytime you're in the ring anywhere. And I'm sure he was probably getting paid handsomely in that show as well. But
Yeah.
those are two of my more fond stories of back in the day.
Jeremy, I could talk 5 hours about Terry Gordy. You got anything that comes to your mind?
Well, the thing that always comes to my mind is I used to ride the school bus with his cousin, and he picked on me when I was young. So I mean, that's what I remember.
What, Jamie Kyle, was it?
No,
Okay.
no, his name was it's Curtis.
Curtis.
It was Gordy. Yeah. So I can remember riding the school bus, but
I
just those match that first match against the Von Erichs there, fantastic.
It is, and I want to answer, is he, being from Chattanooga, so the only other wrestler I could come up with is Eddie Graham, but easily to me, Eddie Graham's more known as a promoter on in Florida for all those years, and Terry Gordy is the greatest wrestler from Chattanooga, don't you think?
Has to be.
Has to be.
Yeah, wouldn't no doubt.
Ellie, same question. Greatest wrestler from Chattanooga?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Any memories you have or any stories that you've told us the one about the wrestling and rain.
No, that's the only one. When the match was over with, it was like a double count out. So I wish I could remember who he was wrestling. It was a double count out. Of course, he always had his wrist taped up with that white athletic tape. And once he was done wrestling, he unwrapped it and he threw it down and it landed right in front of where I was supposed to be sitting at. And as a kid, getting that and taking it home, you're talking about somebody so fired up and couldn't sleep that night because he got something from the wrestling match.
You fired my dog up too over in the corner. He liked that. Well, I'm going to share a story, and I've already alluded to it. I got to meet Terry a couple of times through friends of friends, and the night it was the Freebird. It was the Leonard Skinner reunion 7 years later, or 10 years later after the plane crash, and all my friends are gathered around, and we're excited to see Leonard Skinner, and I looked down and I saw Terry Gordy, who I'd met one time in my life through mutual friends. And I walked down and I was like, hey, dog, be that quiet. I was like, hey, Terry.
Oh, whoa. You told Terry Gordy to be quiet?
No, I didn't.
Well, he said he walked up and then the dog went, woo. So you walked up and went, woo.
I walked up to Terry Gordy and I said, hey, I know you don't remember me, but my name is so-and-so and I'm friends of so-and-so. He goes, hi. And he shook my hand and he's like, what are y'all doing? And I was like, we're just hanging out, about to go to the concert. And he goes, all right, you want to hang out with me? And I literally was on the floor hanging out with Terry Gordy. And all I could say was, I'm sitting there and everybody walks by. I'm just like, I'm his hype man. I'm like, I'm hanging out with Terry Gordy at a Leonard Skinner show. He was so nice, so polite to me.
Amazing.
Such a
great guy.
I cannot tell you what a great guy he was. Jerry, he had the reputation to be in wrestling, the Terry Gordy of the Freebirds, but he really genuinely was just a nice guy and a great human being.
He was so nice to me, and he could see that inner mark in my eye. He knew who he was talking to, and he respected that, and I love him for it, man, because they say don't meet your heroes, but I've been lucky enough to meet at least most of mine in pro wrestling. They've all been great so far.
I remember, and I'm sure I was marking out all over the UTC arena that night. And
I am just hearing about it.
And I wanted to make sure that a fan got to hang out with him and knew who he was and wanted to hang out with him. He made me feel special just by knowing who he is.
Yeah.
So, guys, we got about 5 minutes, and I just want to give everybody a chance. I know some of the Gordy family, and I want to say before we go any farther, this is done out of love, and I could sit here forever. I love professional wrestling because I grew up loving Terry Gordy, and he gave me something that a kid at not a very old age, when I found out he was from Chattanooga, he was always my guy, you know, and no matter where he went, I would be like, hey, I'm from the same hometown as Terry Gordy. And the fact that he does have ties, and he always was from Chattanooga, Rossville, this area, meant a lot to me. Jerry, what would you like to say to close out the night?
Same thing. You know, pro wrestling for me was more than just a love. It was an escape from a lot of traumatic things going on at that time. So they gave me mind vacations. They gave me a sense of hope, a sense of enjoyment when not much at that time did. So I don't know if, even being a wrestler myself, I don't know if they know how tremendously they have impacted people in a positive way, and how we will always keep his name on our lips with high respect and high honor. And hopefully he can live on through our memories and the stories we tell our children, and they tell their children's children. Absolutely.
Jeremy, we've talked about Terry Gordy on this show so many times. And again, we hold him in a special regard. But it made me feel good, too, to have my guy be a bad man on the wrestling ring.
Yeah, well, and like you said, from your hometown, everybody likes to see folks that or make it big. I mean, we got a kid now that got a UFC contract. Trevor Peak, he's from straight out of Sand Mountain. He wears the T-shirt, and it's great. And our whole area is become UFC fans. And so in the same respect, you got a guy like Terry Gordy, Rossville High School, and people that follow, especially people that follow wrestling, but even people that didn't. Hey, this local kid has made it big, and is doing big things. And it's really, it's nice to see that. It's nice to see somebody hey, they live where I live, and they were able to make it, And other thing I just want to say, we say it a lot, but he left us too soon. 40 years old. My goodness, 40 years old. And
one of the questions I was going to ask you during this show, and I never ask it, in today's modern era, at 40 years old, he would probably be set up for a great WWE run, wrestling the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan back in the day, or now. It's so much left on the table.
Yeah, he would be in it. He would be considered. And one of the things I was listening to the other day, they talked about the fact that now wrestlers reach their prime in their late 30s, early 40s, because they physically they've developed, but then too they've developed like psychology and just understanding crowds and knowing when to do things, and so they're just much better on that aspect of it. So it's just sad because I mean, gosh, he had he had at least 10, 15 more years in the tank, you would think.
Jerry, and Howie, I'm gonna let you have fun. Well, I want to ask you the same question. He was just a little bit behind, but I could have seen that great run if the accident don't happen and it gets late in his career with a Hulk Hogan around the circuit or with the Ultimate Warrior. Just
we were this close too. He did the run with the Hood, but his skills had already diminished after the accident. Mm-hmm. That he just, I mean, they had plans for him to go with the Undertaker, and imagine that feud, if that would have really taken off, him and the Undertaker. It's like, Undertaker, make you famous. Not that he needed made famous, but in the WWE, that's who gave you the rub, and he was about to get that rub. So I could have definitely seen him as heavyweight champion, easily climbing up Intercontinental champion, whatever they had going at the time, for sure.
Yeah. There's a great interview with Mick Foley about this period too, and Mick had talked about working with him in Japan and how important it was. When you hear some of the interviews, how important it was for other people in the wrestling industry to uphold Terry Gordy's image, that lets you know what he was thought of. Howie, same thing back at you to wrap it up tonight.
Yeah, just being someone from the Chattanooga area, making the hometown proud. That was, that's big. Like Jeremy said, we got the Trevor Peak that's in the UFC now, and I'm sure that back then, even more so then, everybody in Chattanooga was excited because they had somebody going not just nationally but worldwide by going to Japan as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just to wrap it up, I didn't even talk about the AWA, the Road Warriors versus the Freebirds outside in Kentucky Park in front of 60,000, and how great that was. Jerry, I hope you can come back and join us.
Definitely. I had a good time.
Oh, I absolutely had the greatest time. We appreciate your time. And again, plug your stuff one more time, Jerry.
All right, it's the Chronic Network. It's youtube.com/@the Chronic Network is where you'll find all my videos. You can find me on Facebook under Chronic Conversations or the Chronic Network as well, and see all of the things we've put out, from live podcast, recorded podcast, to Getting Baked with Gran, a cooking show with my very beautiful wife Jennifer over there, and sometimes co-host, and also some horror shorts and a sketch comedy show called the Chronic Chronicles. If I can get that out, so tongue twister.
Jeremy, Howie, we'll be here next Thursday, and we'll have a classic wrestler of the week, a series we're doing now. And either one of y'all have a nominee for classic wrestler of the week.
I say we change it to classic wrestler of the month and go back to our top 10 of single wrestlers.
I like that. Well, let's do the top 10 of the AWA. Let's start there.
Oh, nice.
And listen, guys, top 10, not 1A, 1B. Top 10.
My list will be 22 long, and Jeremy's will be 8 long. So,
Yeah, mine was a little short last time, so I didn't have any A and B there. I just went with what I had.
They make fun of me because I'll have a tie for 10th place among 17 people.
Was you a ref? Because they can't count either.
For Jerry Anderson, Chronic Conversations, JJ, Jeremy Johnson, the Five Red Devils, Howie here, the Tyler Van Show, Randall, it's still real to us. Thank you for watching. God bless the Gordy family. We all love Terry, and it's out of do this.
All love.